This week, we will look at the future of trade. As with week 8, this week is not in the textbook but rather prescribed articles. These are uploaded on Canva. This week is a short week and we only have 3 sections to cover. It's the final week of 2020 and we will look at the question, what is the future of trade? What will the future of trade be? There are 2 articles that I will use for this and 1 website. The 2 articles are on Canva and the website is shown below. I will also show you in the slides how to access the website. There's a saying that hindsight is 20/20, or perfect. Before we ask the question of what the future of trade is today, let's briefly look at the previous time of high tension and uncertainty in terms of trade, 1938. To do this, I will use an article by Robertson that appeared in the Economic Journal, another top journal in economics. It is important to note the year in which this article was published, 1938. This is after the Great Depression of the early 1930s, but before the Second World War. In fact, the Second World War will break out almost a year later. Robertson asked the question whether trade will be as important in the future or the 20th century as it was in the 19th century. From week 8, you should have an idea of what trade was like in the 19th century that he refers to here. He uses comparative advantage, another concept taught to you in this course, to discuss this question and work through it. You will see he refers to technology and the changes in technology and how this might affect trade. His conclusion is that there is a narrowing in the comparative advantage between economies. Robertson recommends 6 suggestions on the future of trade. First, he suggests that countries need to exploit the comparative advantages that exist and widen these. He suggests that there's need to look further than these 2 industries of manufacturing and agriculture. In this regard, he has been correct. Agriculture and manufacturing have fallen away in trade and the focus is more on services and technology. A question perhaps to ask today is whether there will be a turn to agriculture after the pandemic, as the individuals have realized the value of these products again. Second, he refers to the natural complexes of balance of payment problems. This persists today as well. Donald Trump was elected on the promise to rebalance the imbalance in the balance of payments between the United States and China. Remember, in previous sessions, we've also referred to the tensions between Japan and China and how this often results in political tension. He suggests that there are advantages of bilateral agreements. While this is certainly true, as you have seen in this course, trade has gone beyond bilateral trade agreements into multilateral trade agreements, regional trade agreements, and the Economic Union of Europe. As mentioned under the first point, he mentions the importance of nutrition for all people, and with the next point, I believe we still fall short of nutrition for all. He calls for the reversal of discrimination policies, especially in the British Empire. This again is still ongoing. The inequality we see in South Africa, the persistent poverty in Africa, the racial inequalities and tensions in the United States. While I believe Black Lives Matter in the United States and locally the decolonization of the curriculum and fees must fall movements have made progress here, we are still far from the goal. In his final point, he notes that there is a need for complex and various policies at various stages of economic cycles to enhance trade. This remains true today, and as you will see later, it includes more than the policies mentioned here. I tried to find an article for this year, but for obvious reasons, no appropriate article exists. That is because of the global pandemic and the collapse in trade. Keep your eyes open in the future for research on the COVID pandemic's effect on global trade. The second article is written by Goldberg in 2019 for the IMF. In this short article, there are 4 main points to focus on. It does, however, start with an interesting quote. The post-war global economy saw unprecedented growth of global trade and income. This is, of course, after the previous article written before the Second World War. So we know that after the Great Depression and the Second World War, trade recovered and surpassed the level of the 19th century. The first point that Goldberg makes is that structural features are becoming increasingly apparent and important in global trade. These have also been more so since the 2009 recession. There's also a wider discussion on the dominance of China in export markets and the growth of China's export. She also mentions 2 sources of dissatisfaction and that increased income inequality is linked to this. The first source of dissatisfaction is the interpretation of rules, and the second, the way in which international negotiations and new agreements are reached on the international stage. She ends her article with the observation that increased trade in services, especially digital services, will involve different economies at different levels of economic development. She also mentions the importance of regional trade agreements. Finally, we will look at the important areas of trade in the future. Some of these you will have guessed by now and with the knowledge you gained through the course. We use the World Economic Forum's website for this. You can click on the link here or go to the website as in the notes. If you click on the website, it will take you to this. If you click on the link, it will take you to this website. The first is that they mentioned that trade tensions were on the rise, like before the Great Depression, and that this was even before the global pandemic that radically increased these tensions. As mentioned before, the COVID pandemic has radically impacted global trade, and even though it's an exogenous shock, it will continue to have an impact. What are some of the future impacts that global health shocks might have on trade? The main focus on trade is certainly services, and they specifically mention 3D printing and technological services and digital services. Another aspect they focus on is how policy will impact trade. They focus on competition, tax, and industrial policy, different to Robertson's focus on tax and import control. Finally, and the COVID pandemic has again exposed this, is green trade. This not only means trade in green technologies and green products, but also how green products are moved from one point to another in the global chain, from one point in the global economy to another. This means the whole supply chain should be considered when considering green trade. That's the end of this course. I hope you learned something and that you enjoyed the course. Good luck with the exam.